Phil Twyford.
You know, you can't walk around or drive around any of the newer suburbs in Auckland these days without coming across a house that's surrounded by scaffolding and wrapped in white plastic. And it's just a sign of the times, really, these houses that are wrapped up in white plastic. It looks bizarre, but it's become an emblem of you know, the kind of legacy of what PricewaterhouseCoopers calculated was a $22 billion calamity that afflicted New Zealand really over 2 decades. 23 billion, Clayton Cosgrove says. And I was baffled, just by way of preamble to part one, Mr. Chairman, baffled by Paula Bennett's recent comments that New Zealand has moved on, that it's over the leaky homes crisis. Because this bill, and particularly part one, as we'll see, which makes changes to the qualifying criteria for the financial assistance package, I thought it was baffling that she would say that and in the same breath would release her loopy rules task force report that proposes that builders are able to self-certify to sign off their own work. And in the years since the early 90s, 1994 I think it was, when we saw the deregulation of the building sector and all of the other factors that flowed through into the systemic breakdown that led to the leaky homes crisis. If there was anything that we should have learned, is that clear accountability and a strong commitment to quality assurance and quality control is what's needed. As my colleague Clayton Cosgrove pointed out, this financial assistance package was trumpeted by Maurice Williamson at the top of the news bulletins and the front pages of the newspapers as a $1 billion rescue package, a $1 billion rescue package. And, but it didn't really turn out that way. And what we've seen is actually that although the government announced the scheme was going to fix 16,450 homes, as of about a year ago, only 87 leaky homes had been fixed. And the ministry said at the time that they had approved repair plans for another 364 and a further 3,000 had qualified for assistance. But one commentator after another, including people like Paul Grimshaw and Tim Rainey, two prominent lawyers representing the owners of leaky homes, made it clear that the funding assistance package might have added, you know, another option for people who didn't want to go through the courts, who felt that mediation or adjudication wouldn't serve them very well. It gave them another option based on this concept of 25, 25, 50. 25% of the costs to be picked up by the local authority, 25% by the government and 50% by the owner or the claimant. So what this bill does fundamentally is it sets out to provide a bit of clarity. It responds to a Supreme Court decision that we'll talk about in a bit more detail, and in doing so, it slightly extends the eligibility criteria and the number of potential claimants. But I want to comment particularly about part one of the bill, and it basically deals with a lack of clarity that the courts have commented on in relation to the eligibility criteria. The criteria basically require that they exclude any claimant from eligibility where the claimant has initiated civil proceedings against a council in respect of a leaky home or has entered into adjudication. So you can't have it both ways. If you've initiated civil proceedings and you're in court actions underway, or there's mediation or adjudication going on, then you can't also proceed under the funding assistance package. So the main change in part one Mr. Chairman. The main change in Part 1 is that it takes those eligibility criteria that
Would the member like a call?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Twyford.
They were contained in the Gazette notice. And what this provision does is that it moves them into the legislation proper in order to, and I quote, avoid any doubt as to the intended effect of the criteria, and so that there's no question of inconsistency with the Act. Now, I'd actually be interested to hear from the Minister, or even if there's a member who was on the Select Committee who heard the submissions. It's not entirely clear to me, based on the written material available, why the criteria, those key criteria in the Gazette notice, why there was any lack of clarity. So I'd be interested to hear that, because there's not a heck of a lot in this bill, only a couple of parts, but this is one of them. It seems pretty minor and technical to me, but I would be interested in hearing explanation about why it was worth addressing in Part 1.
Porter Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.